Alright, so I've started a new chat, and the prompt I'm starting with now, so it's forgotten our entire previous history, as well as the document that I've uploaded in this conversation. And I'm saying that I'm going to provide it with a document that summarizes Bailin and Battersby's approach to critical thinking pedagogy, and I would like to perform a critical inquiry using their method, and I would like you to guide me through their process one step at a time. So I'm emphasizing one step at a time now because I was giving the entire process at once before. Please provide me with direction in the inquiry process, as well as feedback on whether I am in alignment or out of alignment with their guidelines. And I'm just asking if it understands its role, because I'm curious. I guess I'm nervous that if I didn't ask that it might not understand, and I'd be kind of making assumptions. Yes, I understand my role. Provide me the document. Once I have the information, I can guide you through their process step by step, providing direction and feedback to ensure that you're in alignment with their guidelines. Feel free to share the document. We can begin the inquiry process. Okay, so let's see how that goes from there. So I paused the video last time to skip ahead, but I'm leaving it running this time just to see it, to show how fast it actually goes. So yeah, in that amount of time, it's scanned through that document for that same information, and it's just here summarizing its understanding of it, I guess, and giving those same guidelines that it extracted last time, which is good. Alright, so now as we proceed with a critical inquiry using their method, I will guide you through these steps, providing feedback on your alignment with their guidelines. Let's begin by identifying a specific issue or topic that you would like to explore critically. So I'm going to grab my question that I kind of have been in the process of refining. Okay, so this is my inquiry question that's been refined a bit since we've started now. I'm not sure if this will be still remain my final inquiry question or not, but are there examples of modern education practices that could be considered a violation of a child's human rights? It's an excellent starting point. To proceed with their method, we should follow these steps. Alright, so now it's again giving me each of the steps, not one step at a time, which is what I was kind of hoping for. I could still use this as a guide. I could kind of... Okay, good. So it gave me an overview, and now it's... so let's see what it said. It said, identify the issue. You've already formulated the inquiry question, which focuses on whether modern education practices could be considered a violation of a child's human rights. And it's giving me the feedback. This is a clear and specific issue to explore. So, I'm curious if it... if I would have asked the original question, if it would have gave me more pushback on that, or if if my question is just legitimately better in its eyes. But yeah, I'm glad that it actually commented on the quality of this and is kind of saying like this gets the green light to go ahead. But I am curious if it would ever have said no, like let's refine that question a little bit more. That's maybe a future experiment. Recognize the kind of claims and judgment at issue. In this case, the claim is that certain modern educational practices might violate human rights. And that, I think, is a much more accurate representation of what I was trying to describe and struggling to explain before. I think that that's a really... that is the claim. That is like the hunch that I have that I'm wanting to explore. And the judgment will involve determining whether this claim can be supported by evidence and sound reasoning. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really comment on, the ethical nature of this judgment, as well as kind of like the more pragmatic nature of this issue, but that's fine. Yeah, it could maybe do a better job of that, but maybe it'll... And I think that's what it's skipping. I think it's skipping past. Would you like to start by gathering arguments and evidence for and against the claim? This could involve specific educational practices, international human rights standards, and looking at various viewpoints on the issue. So it has skipped past 1 and 2, and I feel like it probably could have stuck at number 2. So I'm just going to give it that feedback. Okay, so yeah, now it's giving... Yeah, okay, this is getting much better. And so I think this is just part of the playing with process, I guess. And this is also why I hear so many people underestimating the capabilities of ChatGPT and AI, is because if you asked it that first question and it skipped right past that and didn't, have this conversation with it, then we wouldn't have got this kind of feedback, that it's totally skipped past question 2. But then when I, called it on it, it actually is giving pretty specific information about what step 2 is. So it's not like it didn't understand, or it's not that it's not capable of understanding, but it does need to be prompted in a way that is clear enough. And so that's where I feel like I probably could make a GPT, bot that has this stuff pre-programmed into it, or not really programmed, but like this initial conversation of this is exactly how I want you to respond, give it all this context ahead of time, that potentially I could just start a new conversation with that bot and say this is the issue, and it would take me through here's step 1, focus on that, now step 2, and give me this level of detail. So a lot of it is just clarifying the what you want it to do, and if you do a bad job of that, then you're going to get a bad response. But so let's delve into more thoroughly of the context of the question. In recognizing the kinds of claims or judgment issue, we should consider the nature of the claim. The claim is a normative one, meaning it involves value judgments about what is right and wrong, particularly in the context of human rights. Types of judgments involved ethical judgments about whether there's certain educational practices are ethically justifiable. Legal judgments involve determining whether certain practices contravene established human rights law or international conventions. Practical judgments, these might revolve around the practicality or necessity of certain educational practices in varying contexts. Yeah, so this is super strong, I think. Criteria for evaluation. To judge these claims, one would need to criteria based on human rights doctrine, educational theories, and perhaps educational efficacy. This would include looking at international human rights documents, like the one that's mentioned in the previous conversations, ethical theories about the rights and well-being of children, and empirical evidence regarding the impact of certain educational practices on children. By thoroughly understanding the nature of the claim and types of judgments involved, you can better understand your inquiry and ensure that it aligns with Bailin and Battersby's approach to critical thinking. This step is crucial for framing subsequent steps of exploring arguments in context, as well as the final comparative evaluation and judgment. Now, with a clearer understanding of the claim and judgment at issue, you can proceed to explore relevant reasons and arguments. Would you like to begin gathering? So, I do think that this was helpful. Yeah, I think that this was really good, and that's something that maybe I could claim that, like, provide this kind of evaluation. It could have prompted me to try and come up with these different things, but I think this is a super solid starting point for that. So now that we've done this, would you like to begin examining these arguments and evidence? Absolutely. So to gather and examine arguments and evidence relevant to your inquiry question, we should look at both sides of the issue. Arguments suggesting that certain modern educational practices might violate human rights, and counter-arguments that may justify these practices or argue that they do not constitute human rights violations. Yeah, okay, so I like this so far. Arguments suggesting violation of human rights. So yeah, this is feeling much stronger than what it was before. This is really what I knew it could do, and I'm like happy to see it doing it. Like, Here it's going to provide me some directions to explore. Look for documented instances where modern educational practices have been criticized for violating these, like corporal punishment, denial of access to education. International standards, examine how these. So I think maybe what I would do now is ask it for some examples of these things. So it's giving me it's prompting me, which is great, to go do this work. In this case, I'm kind of trying to do like shortcutting a bunch of stuff, and this is more of a proof of concept than anything. So I'm going to see what it can come up with for this kind of things. But I think this is a super solid guide for it. If my project was to actually conduct this and write a paper on this whole thing, I think that this would be not a bad way of saying, okay, I've got my prompt from ChatGPT. Now I'm going to go do these different things. I'm going to look at some research examples and document that kind of stuff and do some of that work myself. For the sake of just this, I'm going to see what it can come up with, though. And yeah, after we do that, then we can evaluate both sides, seek multiple perspectives, document your finding. Yeah, here I think it's really doing a good job of what I asked it to do, of guiding me through the process, and also giving feedback of things that are less obvious in the process. Like the things that are like seeking multiple perspectives and giving, telling me to document the findings and things like that. Question assumptions, check for biases. Yeah, here it's talking about the nature of inquiry, spirit of inquiry, maintain an open-minded and critical approach. Question assumptions, check for biases, consider the reliability of your sources. Once you've gathered and examined the arguments and evidence, we can move on to understanding. Let me know if you want further guidance or if you have findings you'd like to discuss. See that, yeah, this is exactly what I was trying to get out of it. Is that this makes this process a dialogue where not only has it kind of set me up on this process, but it's also there for that feedback, and in that way, if you could get this to a standard, have some level of quality assurance, then I think that this would be potentially like a really wonderful tutor or a guide for someone to conduct a critical inquiry, even if they never read the book or don't have a process or a too much understanding of critical inquiry or critical thinking. Might need to be a bit more accessible, or this is also a big time commitment to do that kind of stuff in depth. But I guess if a student was writing a paper or something, that would be could be super valuable. Okay, so I'm going to ask it for some more details to see what it can come up with on its own. So I'm just saying, can you provide me with some specific examples of arguments and counter arguments I could look into? So it gave me some general ones here, and we'll see if it gives me specific or just more general examples. Certainly here are some examples. Arguments suggesting violations of human rights. Corporal punishment in school. Argument, it's a violation of the children's right to be free from physical harm and degrading treatment. Evidence, research showing the psychological and physical harm caused by corporal punishment. So I mean, like, it's not backing up these claims. I'll ask it for that. I was kind of hoping it would provide links, but I didn't ask it to. So, lack of inclusivity and accessibility. These are still decent topics to look into, right? I think it would be worth looking into these different things. But again, corporal punishment is not an example of like a modern educational practice that is widely accepted in first world countries. So I don't think that's really not part of what I'm looking into. Lack of inclusivity and accessibility. This is closer to what I'm looking for, and yeah, high stakes testing. Again, I feel like that's more just commenting on. There's a lot of arguments against high stakes testing. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, but yeah. Okay, so counter arguments. In some cultures, corporal punishment is seen as an effective and traditional discipline method. Cultural studies or testimonies defending it as part of, like some educational institutions might argue logistical and financial constraints in fully implementing inclusive education. Yeah, and I think that that's a fair point. Benefits of standardized testing, for sure. Okay, some additional considerations. Digital divide in education, that's not a bad thing to think about, and educational curriculum content may be seen as indoctrination or as violating the right of the child to conform to their own beliefs and opinions. That's a more interesting point. That's a little bit less, obvious, I suppose. Okay, but I wanted to say, could you provide arguments with actual sources to investigate? Yeah, so like this is this is where I think we get into where it can really save time. Again, you have to obviously you have to be careful, and I'm interested to see if these things are right, and it can be leading you down. It can be its own form of bias in by selecting these kind of things, but corporal punishment in schools, a source to investigate the case against corporal punishment in schools by Human Rights Watch. So it provided a real website, so that's a good start. Obviously, we need to investigate whether this is a reliable source, and but yeah, I mean it's an interesting place to start. Topics. I'm assuming they have education in here somewhere. Yeah, perhaps. Anyways, so that's one source. Exclusion of children with disabilities. United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this is a real website, but it didn't link to the specific thing that it was talking about, so I'd have to investigate whether or not I guess what kind of reports to look at there. Stress and mental health impact of high stakes testing. Study on this by the National Education Association. Okay, so it provided me with the link to their website, but I'm not sure if that's an actual policy brief or not. I'd have to check that out, so maybe I'll do that. So I didn't try it crazy hard, but I did have trouble finding the specific sources that it was talking about, so I'm just going to say that and ask if it can come up with any actual links to real articles. I don't know whether those ones were fake or not, but so here the ChatGPT 4 at this point is actually accessing the internet at this point. So I didn't see it do that before. So it may have been just going off of general knowledge. It may have made those articles up, or maybe not. I'm not totally sure. It seemed like the sources, like the actual websites it was linking me to, wouldn't have been they probably would have been decent places to investigate, but they also could have just been rabbit trails. Okay, so it has taken me to a real place at this point. Again, I'd have to investigate the. So this is the website I think it led me to before, the Human Rights Watch. Yeah, but now it's provided me a specific link to this. Again, I don't know the context of this, so I'd have to investigate whether or not this was a quality source. It seems like something legitimate at this point, but it would take a little bit more digging to see. Challenges in implementing inclusive education. Okay, so yeah, this is taking me to a real report. It might be worth looking into. Yeah, again, I have to check the. I mean, this seems like a legitimate source just at first glance. So yeah, that's not a bad starting point. I think, however, maybe part of the problem here is that I think maybe the nature of this inquiry question is somewhat uh, maybe not hypothetical, but I mean I suppose it's that I'm not really looking for like research studies on these different things. I think it's more of just a argument of if you can define what human rights are and these different things that um, you could think of examples from personal experience or from your knowledge of how school systems works of things that violate that. So it'd be helpful if there was um, writing on this topic that laid all that kind of stuff out for me. But I think my my suspicion is that there isn't a paper on exactly what it is that I'm talking about here, and so a better starting point at this point might not be so much of like looking into the different views, but more of just like coming up with some specific examples. Um, well, I mean, by defining human rights, and then just trying to brainstorm some examples of things that could be examples of that. So maybe I'll ask it that. What are the so I mean, now I've asked it what this is, and it's searching the internet, and so now I feel like I again may have confused it because based on the context of what I asked, just asked it for specific sources. Um, but I mean, I did want a source for this, so as outlined by UNICEF. I mean, UNICEF is well known. I don't know enough about human rights specifically to know if this is the um, kind of the most well agreed upon source for this information, but I'm assuming that this is a decent source. So, universal rights. Children, like all human beings, are entitled to fundamental human rights without discrimination. These rights are interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. Although not legally binding, sets a common standard for human rights, emphasizing that all humans should be treated equally without respect. These include. Okay, and now it's listing a bunch, or I mean a bunch of sources, not specific rights. Um, okay, well, I mean, this did give me sources to investigate. Um, so, yeah, from there I could start looking into what those human rights are and start thinking about examples of it. Um, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit lost at this point of what the best approach is here. Yeah, on the one hand, I um, I mean maybe the problem is just that like I'm trying to do a rush job of this, and at this point it's given me some things to do, and I haven't gone and specifically done them, so I don't feel like I can move on. Um, but let's just pretend I think I'm just gonna say all right. I'm ready for the next step of the process. So yeah, I guess if this is just going to be a proof of concept of can AI be a helpful guide in conducting a critical inquiry, and specifically based off of Bailin and Battersby's framework, um, I think that it did, like the previous step, did give me some good starting points. I think there's lots of different ways that you could then use AI to investigate that specific step of digging into it more. But for the sake of it, I'm just going to kind of move on and say, okay, it's the next step of the process, and then um, it's saying now that you have a better understanding of human rights and have explored specific arguments and counterarguments, the next step in Bailin and Battersby's critical thinking approach is to understand the context of the issue. And so, I'm happy it is back on track. It hasn't lost track of what my original context of this conversation was. That what is the historical and cultural context? How have these changed over time? What are other cultural factors influence these changes? What are legal frameworks in different countries? Societal values and ethical principles underpin arguments on both sides. Comparative evaluation of reasons arguments. Assess the validity and strength of the arguments for and against. Critically analyze the quality and reliability of the evidence supporting each. Balance of arguments, determine which are more convincing. Once you've completed these steps, you'll be ready to form a reasoned judgment based on your critical evaluation. This judgment should reflect a balanced consideration of all aspects of the issue. If you have specific findings or insights for your evaluation that you'd like to discuss or need further guidance, feel free to share them. Yeah, so this is like, again, I'm quite happy with this. I think it's laid out kind of what the next steps are in their process, and it's also giving specific examples of the issue. These aren't the only things that you would maybe need to look into, but it does give like some really good starting points. I think following it word for word could still end up being problematic, but at the same time, I do think it's a pretty good guide for following it in general. And I am liking that it's saying to ask for if I need to discuss or further guidance on, like that's really exactly what I'm kind of going for. So now we're on to the final step, is to reach a reasoned judgment. So that was something I noticed in the last version of this. I think it did start getting kind of confused between Bailin and Battersby and then its original answer of what their critical thinking process was, because it did kind of have that reflect on the inquiry process at the end, which obviously isn't a bad thing to do, but it didn't seem like it was one of the like kind of pillars of their approach. So reach a reasoned judgment involves synthesizing the information and insights you've gathered to form a well-reasoned conclusion. Are there examples of modern education practices that could be considered a violation of children's human rights? Integrate your findings. Form your conclusion based on your critical analysis. Should be supported by the strongest evidence and arguments you've encountered. Reflect on the process. Reflect on what you've learned, the method of inquiry, any biases or assumptions you've had to navigate. Openness to revision. Be open to the possibility that new information or perspectives could modify your judgment. Critical thinking is an ongoing process. Yeah, this is great. This is the kind of thing that I was really surprised with AI initially. I wasn't expecting it to be so careful with its words, and to give kind of these kind of non-black and white responses of, that this is you haven't just come to the conclusion, but that it's an ongoing process. Feel free to share your conclusions or any reflections on the process if you have any questions. Yeah, I like that. I like that it's kind of saying, like, even though it's a little bit weird, you can kind of like celebrate your learning with somebody there. So I'm going to ask it to reflect. How well do you think you guided me through is there anything you think could be improved? include providing more detailed guidance on evaluating the strength and relevance of specific arguments, offering more direct sources or examples for each argument might have enriched the process. I mean, that's pretty general, but I don't know. Okay, so yeah, I feel like as a proof of concept, it can act as a really good facilitator. Maybe that's a better word than guide. Guide works too, but that it kind of facilitated a dialogue critical inquiry. And yeah, so I think my next step is I'm going to see if I can make a GPT version that just kind of has this built in, that you could just start by having it prompt you what's your inquiry and then guide you through this process without the need for this, because I had to provide all the context, and so if somebody else wanted to recreate this, they would also need to provide that context, probably by giving that article or some other summary of the process. But this could be done. If I was able to make a GPT, I could just pass that to somebody who had never read the textbook, had no idea, and just said, if they're needing to write some sort of paper or do some sort of like formal critical thinking about a topic, that could be used as a guide. I wonder if there could be maybe an academic version and a more like everyday version. Like what's a 15-minute inquiry or something like that. Maybe that's too short for anything really valuable, but yeah, okay, well, that's going to be my next step.